Bellewstown Racecourse, Ireland. June 26, 1975. Just after 1:25 p.m., a man named Benny O'Hanlon walks up to the only public telephone at the racecourse gate. He picks up the receiver, dials a number, and starts sobbing. There's no one on the other end. For the next 15 minutes, he stays glued to that phone, pretending to have a heartbreaking conversation about a dying relative. While outside, a growing line of frustrated bookmakers representatives waits on the gravel. They can't drag him out. They can't get the police involved. He hasn't broken any law. All Benny is doing is tying up the one phone line connecting every off-track betting shop in the UK to the bookmakers standing at this racecourse. Meanwhile, 50 miles away in a rented cottage, a broke 36-year-old Irish gambler named Barney Curley sits by a transistor radio. By 3 p.m., he'll have made £300,000. The bookmaking industry will spend the next year trying to claw that money back, and they'll fail because every part of what Curley did was, technically, completely within the rules. So, how did a bankrupt gambler drowning in £8,000 of debt pull off one of the biggest wins in British betting history in a single afternoon? And why did that phone booth matter so much? To answer that, we need to rewind 2 months to a horse named Yellow Sam. Who was Barney Curley? Barney Curley was born April 12, 1939, in a small northern Irish town, the second of 6 children. His father baked bread for a living. As a teenager, Barney felt called to the priesthood and entered a seminary in County Wicklow at just 16, spending 5 years studying theology and philosophy. Then, 6 months before he was set to take his final vows, he walked away. He later said he'd prayed for forgiveness every night, but never once asked God to help him quit gambling. After leaving the seminary, he drifted through jobs, insurance, bookmaking, before turning to professional gambling full-time by his late 20s. He had a real talent for it, but by the mid-1970s, life had worn him down. 3 bankruptcies, 2 lost homes, a failed marriage, and children who no longer visited. By spring 1975, Curley was living alone with his dog in a rented cottage, owing thousands to a local pub owner. He was 36, broke, and had spent 2 decades quietly studying the mechanics of British betting for exactly this kind of moment. How the system worked. British racing in 1975 ran on 2 separate worlds. On one side were the bookmakers physically at the track, adjusting odds in real time based on what people bet in front of them. On the other were thousands of high street betting shops, where anyone could walk in and place a bet on a race happening anywhere in the country. These 2 worlds were linked by a single rule. Bets placed off-track were paid out based on the starting price, the final odds set at the track right before the race began. Picture it like an auction happening in one small room, but people elsewhere could phone in bids. If the room filled with bidders, prices moved one way. If the phones filled up instead, the room had no idea, and prices stayed put. And in 1975, the only connection between the phones and that room was a single public telephone booth at each racecourse entrance. Bookmakers around the country relied on this line constantly, calling in the final minutes before a race to adjust trackside odds based on how much money was riding on a horse elsewhere. The entire system depended on that one phone line staying open. Curley had studied this weak point for years. The horse Yellow Sam. Yellow Sam was a 6-year-old gelding Curley had bred himself. Its trainer was an old friend from seminary days. Its jockey, a 23-year-old with no major wins to his name. On paper, Yellow Sam looked hopeless. 0 wins in 14 races over a year and a half. Curley wanted it that way. He needed the horse's public record to look like a joke. What nobody realized was that Curley had deliberately entered the horse only in races run on wet, heavy ground, conditions the horse hated. Bred for firm, dry turf, Yellow Sam had actually won 9 of 12 private trials on good ground. On race day, June 26, 1975, the forecast was clear skies and firm turf, exactly the conditions the horse thrived in. Bookmakers, going purely off its terrible public record, priced it at 20-1. Curley had the horse. He had the day. Now, he needed the method. The plan had 4 parts, each timed precisely. Spread the money thin. Around £15,000 would be split across roughly 300 betting shops nationwide, in stakes small enough £50 to £300 each to avoid triggering any red flags. Bet at the last possible moment. All bets would go in between 1:45 and 1:55 p.m., late enough that there'd be no time for shops to phone the track and get the odds lowered, but early enough to beat the cutoff. Choose a track with a single point of failure. Bellewstown had exactly 1 public phone at its entrance. No backup line, nothing. Block that phone. As Curley reportedly told a friend beforehand, Tie up that one phone for half an hour, and every bookmaker in Britain pays out at 20 to 1. He'd found the single weak link in the entire national betting network. Now, he needed people to help him exploit it. Over 6 weeks, Curley quietly recruited around 250 people, friends, relatives, people who owed him money from better days, to each walk into a specific betting shop at the right moment. There was no master list, no paperwork. Word traveled through phone calls, pub conversations, and after-church chats. Instructions passed down through a small chain. Curley to a handful of regional contacts, who passed it to local coordinators, who briefed individual agents just hours before the race. The instructions were simple. Walk in between 1:45 and 1:55. Bet the specified amount on Yellow Sam to win, pay cash, take the receipt, leave. Altogether, across roughly 316 shops, the total staked came to just under £15,800. Money Curley had borrowed, right down to the final £800 he got from a hotel publican the night before. Coordinating 250 people across a 10-minute window, spread across hundreds of miles, with no mobile phones or computers, just word of mouth and good timing. And one of those 250 had the most critical job of all. Back at Bellewstown at 1:25 p.m., Benny O'Hanlon walks to the racecourse's only public phone, picks it up, dials a number nobody will answer, and starts crying, loud enough to be heard through the glass. He's invented a dying ant and is pouring his heart out to no one. At 1:35, the first bookmaker tries to call in and adjust the odds. Busy line. By 1:40, several more agents show up, form a line outside, and wait. At 1:45, someone offers O'Hanlon money to hang up. He shakes his head and keeps going. Eventually, someone calls the police. 2 officers arrive, watch him sob into the phone for a minute and a half, and, convinced it's a genuine family emergency, decide to leave him be. By 1:58, with no calls having gotten through for over half an hour, the trackside bookmakers have no updated information, and Yellow Sam's odds stay locked at 20 to 1. One man, one phone, and a fake story about a dying relative had completely cut off the UK betting industry's communication line for 35 minutes. 2 p.m., the race begins. 50 miles away, Curley sits at his kitchen table with his dog and a cup of tea, listening to the radio broadcast. Yellow Sam runs mid-pack early, moves up steadily, and pulls clear at the final jump to win by 2.5 lengths, at 20 to 1. Curley didn't celebrate. He just poured another cup of tea. He later said he'd been broke at 1 p.m. and had £300,000 coming to him by 2, and drank tea because he didn't know what else to do. The total payout owed across all those betting shops came to roughly £34,000, enough at the time to buy around 30 average British homes outright. In today's money, that's worth several million. In just 35 minutes, Curley had pulled off one of the largest single-day gambling wins in British racing history. Within 2 days, several major bookmakers refused to pay, arguing the operation was an unfair manipulation of the system. They hoped a court would void the bets. Curley's lawyers countered that every bet had been placed legally, in licensed shops, at published odds, in cash with receipts. The case dragged through Irish courts from 1976 to 1978, and Curley won every single one. The court ruled he hadn't broken any law. The bets stood. A few smaller bookmaking firms went out of business within the year. By late 1978, after the final ruling, Curley had collected the rest of his winnings. The bookmakers had lost their legal fight too. There was no getting the money back. In direct response to the Bellewstown incident, Irish racing authorities mandated multiple phone lines at every track starting in 1976. British racing adopted the same rule shortly after. By 1977, the entire starting price system was overhauled to pull from multiple sources instead of a single trackside line, a reform some in the industry still informally call the Curley rule. Curley didn't stop gambling. Over the next 4 decades, he ran several more major betting coups, including one in 2010 that reportedly won him around £4 million. By his retirement in 2014, his lifetime winnings were estimated in the tens of millions. He never bought a mansion or a yacht. In 1996, he founded a charity supporting development projects in Zambia. Schools, hospitals, and wells, funding much of it directly through his gambling winnings. He passed away in 2021, at 82. Prominent figures from Irish racing attended his funeral, with one well-known owner remarking that Curley had taken money from bookmakers and given all of it to Africa, and that there might never be anyone quite like him again. His charity is still active today. He didn't steal from anyone. He didn't break a single law. He just tied up one phone booth for 35 minutes. And by the time it was over, the entire British bookmaking industry owed him £300,000.